everyone, my name is Elle, in case you didn't already know, and welcome to my channel. A little while ago I had a request from one of my friends, Amazing Grace, and she asked if I could give some panning advice, specifically relating to my project PanPorn. And she had a bunch of questions and she asked if I wouldn't mind talking about it and helping some people out. And I said, absolutely. I have done a few Q&As and a few advice videos before, just sharing what I know, what I've done, and just trying to help people along their panning journey as well. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to address all of her questions and just chat with you guys a little bit about my journey and the things that I've discovered along the way. Keep in mind that this is my experience and the things that have worked for me, and it might not work for you, and I'm going to touch on all those things. But in case this is helpful, in case you are a little bit stuck with your palette, or if you're trying to hit pan on something and maybe you just need a little bit of motivation, maybe this will help. So I do have some notes here because I wanted to make sure I touched on the important things that she was asking me about. If you do have any other questions, if there's anything that I didn't touch on in this video, leave them for me down below and I'll answer you there. But anyway, I think that's enough of an intro. Let's get started. So the first thing would be, how do you even start? Well, I think the best thing to do at the beginning is to identify why you even want to hit pan. Why? It sounds simple, but really your motivation will guide you the entire time. So it's good to have at least somewhat of an idea why you want to start panning things. For me, personally, my reasoning for starting my project PanPorn was because I wanted to use more of my shadows, things that I hadn't been using, but I also really want to get comfortable and familiar with different finishes, textures, formulas, shades. I really wanted to be able to play around more with my shadows so I would be able to get a better understanding of what I like and why. And that way I will be able to make smarter purchases in the future. If I come across a certain shade or finish or formula that I really dislike, that I really have a hard time using, then I'm gonna know to avoid either the brand or the type or the colors in the future, and I can evaluate my purchases in a smarter way. So my best advice, this is what I wish I knew a couple of years ago, is to take a week or two with no projects, nothing, and just see what you're really gravitating towards naturally. See what sort of shadows you really like to reach for, how you like to do your makeup when there's no sort of pressure attached to it. If you're trying to pan a foundation, if you're trying to pan a blush, forget about it for like a week and just really see what you really go to first. And once you have that idea of what your preferences are, start there. Start with whatever palette you are reaching for the most, but start small. I made the mistake of taking on too much at once. And not only with my eyeshadows, but with my other panning projects as well. And it's just impossible to juggle so many things. So I would suggest a large palette, like a Vice palette, which I had panned last year / earlier this year, or something like a chocolate bar palette. Those are really hard to pan, but everybody's different. So I'd suggest either something like that or perhaps two smaller palettes. So something like a Naked Basics palette, like Naked Basics 1 or Naked 2 Basics, something like the Becca Ombre Rouge palette. Basically anything with around 6 pans or so, or something with really small pans. So like the Burgundy x 9 palette, that would be another example of like a smaller palette. If you really want to tackle single shadows, things that you might be housing in something like a Z palette, some sort of magnetic type of palette, I would suggest looking at one Z palette first, especially if they are single shadows and not just depotted shadows, because single shadows tend to be larger, they tend to have more product than pans that are inside palettes. So more product means it's going to take longer for you to see any concrete usage with the product. And if you feel like adding in an individual shadow or two with your large palette or your smaller palettes, I'd say go for it, but try and keep variety and be realistic about it. So like if you're panning a fairly large neutral palette full of neutral shades, don't throw in an identical neutral color. If it's going to be a dupe for something already within the palette, you're not really accomplishing anything, and you're going to be sort of fighting against yourself, because it's like, what do I reach for? Just pick one or the other. My best advice for that is to really just think about what you would put on your eye and where, how you would use it. So if you look at that whatever palette you have and you see that you have like the perfect transition shade, don't add in another transition shade that's going to accomplish the same thing, because you're not going to be as successful as you would like to be. I tend to rotate around the palette and come up with different looks, so I'm not panning a look, which some people do and it works really well for them. So it's all about personal preference. I like to switch up my makeup all of the time, so if I did the same look day in and day out, I would be very, very bored and I would not stick with it. But for some people, it works amazingly well for them, especially if you live a very busy life. It's really easy to have everything right there. You do the same look until you finish panning something and then you move on to the next thing. And I know some people have had massive success that way. I personally have not. So it can take me longer to hit pan in that case, because I'm not necessarily using the same like 3 shadows every day for a month. I'm using 6 or 7 shadows depending on the size of the palette. I'm using them all, so it might take me a little bit longer depending on the shadow, but I don't mind because I like the variety. I do tend to come up with a couple of variations of looks that I can reach for quickly, because when you are low on time and sometimes inspiration does not hit you, you can't think of what to do, I like to have a couple of things I can fall back on just to know, okay, this is a good lid shade, this is a good outer corner shade, this is a good crease shade, go. And it's so quick, and that works for me as well, because then I'm not reaching for other things. I have a couple of ideas in my mind of what are like sort of those fail-safe options that are always going to work, and then you can switch it up as you need to with eyeliner or no eyeliner and lipstick and different colors like that. So you can add those little variations that will just change it up enough to keep it interesting. Once you've hit pan on something, if that's your goal, you might choose to move on to something else instead of still working on that same palette or same shadow. Totally up to you. It depends on what you really want to accomplish. I have a little bit of a weird structure because I film and share updates. I share my progress. So sometimes there's like a week or so lull in between where I'm not really intentionally panning anything because I've sort of mentally checked out of whatever I was using first, and I don't want to really commit to what I'm going to be tackling next because I want to show what my palette looks like. So for me, it's a little bit different just because of what I'm doing here. So if you're not doing what I'm doing, you can just rotate in and out as you need to. So if your goal was to hit pan on one shadow in a palette and you do, then you can immediately move on to the next thing. There are no rules when it comes to panning. You can do what works for you. Sometimes that little in-between time between when I decide I'm done with a palette, with my project PanPorn, and before I film my update, that little time in between is where I will play around with some things and look at my palettes and figure out what I want to use. I don't go from one day deciding I'm done with a palette to doing an update and just randomly pulling something, you know, out of thin air, like, oh, I'm gonna work on this palette now. I actually do really think about it, and I do play around a little bit, and sometimes if I'm unsure about something, I will take a day or two and play around with it and see, is this something that I really want to commit to for the next month or so? Is this something that is going to work for me right now? Because there's certain shades, certain colors and things that just would not work for me depending on the season or what I'm feeling like. You know, I don't do the same makeup look every day, so I like to have some variation, and I'm very inspired by the seasons. So the way that I choose my palettes and the way I take little mini breaks in between is totally different than I think other people, but it's what works for me, taking that 1 week. And sometimes it's not like I've completely abandoned whatever palette I was working on. I might still use it a little bit. It depends whether or not I've met my goal or not. If my goal was to hit pan on shadows, like I know when I was working on like the Mario palette or the Modern Renaissance palette, it got to a point where I was like, I have to stop using this because I've hit pan on so many shades that my next update's going to be ridiculous. I have to stop using it and move on and figure out what else I'm going to use. So my experience, again, is probably going to be different than a lot of other people's, and that's okay. So with my project PanPorn, sometimes I will choose something that's older that I'm thinking about decluttering, and sometimes I choose something that I'm really just gravitating towards. And if you saw my last update, which was just uploaded recently, I picked 2 palettes that I am really gravitating towards, and they're new palettes. And I did that because it's what I really want to be using. I didn't want to force myself into using something else. I think you need to look at your collection, your makeup stash, your palette stash, and figure out why you want a pan, like I said, and figure out if you are thinking about decluttering a palette, maybe that's a time to take it out for a month or so. Some people do 1 month one palette, some people do 1 week one palette, which are also really great options if you are not really focusing on hitting pan, because some people will do 1 month one palette with the intention of coming up with as many different looks as possible. And if you're doing that and you're just thinking about creating different looks, you're probably not going to hit pan on something, although it can happen. It depends on how you use things. So I would look at it that way. Really have to evaluate it on like a case-by-case basis. And you can look at shadows that already have progress on them. Sometimes I do that, shadows that I've used often that I have a good dip in, because I know it will not take as long to see that pan in there, that little reward. You know, do I just want to hit pan? Because if I just want to hit pan, I'll choose something easy. You know, that's sort of why I put Subculture in my current rotation, because I do really love it. I really love the color scheme, but I also know it's going to be something I'm going to be able to hit pan on really easily, and that's really motivating and inspiring to me. So, you know, there's many different things to think about when it comes to the palettes you are choosing and why. So you really just have to look at yourself. You have to look at what you want to do. The most important thing is consistency and patience. And don't compare yourself to others. So I keep saying this over and over again because I get comments on every single one of my panning videos with people saying they don't know how I can do it. They've been working on things for what feels like years and they have not hit pan, they've not finished something, they just do not know how I'm doing it. And the thing with me is that I wear makeup 7 days a week. Minimum 7 days a week. 7 days is just my daily makeup. I usually film 3 to 4 nights a week. 3 to 4 nights a week of filming. That's a whole new face of makeup. And sometimes I film more than once in a night and I might change my makeup up. And the nights that I don't film, I'm often playing with my makeup. I'm trying out different things. I'm even just swatching things. And I do not think that's cheating. I want to stress that. I've had a few people, I know I just got a little angry about that, but I've had a few people kind of accuse me of cheating when it comes to hitting pan because I swatch things. Listen, some nights when I'm sort of stuck for inspiration, I'm not sure what to do, I will sit with my eyeshadows around me on the floor and I will swatch things and sort of come up with different color combinations, and I'll try and find things that match what I'm feeling. Like if I was really inspired by a certain color combination I saw and I'm like, I really want to recreate that. I really want that effect. I want that blue and that green. And I'll go around and I'll swatch things till I come up with what works. And it's just usage. It's not like I'm like sitting there swatching a shadow back and forth. I'm not swatching things over and over and over and over again trying to hit pan on it. I am swatching to get inspiration, to get ideas. So basically, I'm using eyeshadow probably 12 times a week. That's a lot more than the average person. Let's take person B, for example, just a fictional person B, who only wears eyeshadow 5 days a week. Say they work and they wear eyeshadow Monday through Friday. Well, that 5 times of eyeshadow usage is still a lot, but if you compare it to me, who uses eyeshadow probably 12-ish times a week, that's a huge difference. If we were both using the exact same eyeshadow to set our eyeshadow primer, I would hit pan on that shadow 2, if not 3 times as fast. So that's just something to keep in mind. The way you use shadows also impacts how quickly you hit pan. If you're a light shadow user, you know, washes of color, you know, single shadows, just like one shade. If you do, you know, makeup looks, chances are you're not picking up that much product on your brush. So it's gonna take you a lot longer. The eyeshadow formula itself makes a huge difference. If it's powdery and soft, like my Anastasia shadows, you're gonna hit pan a lot faster. You'll probably see a lot of pan on people's like Modern Renaissance palettes, even people who are even trying to pan things just because of the formula. Pan size also makes a huge difference. If you are panning or trying to pan a Z palette full of full-size single shadows, you are going to have a much harder time than someone who is panning like even a naked palette, because the pans are that much smaller. So again, something to consider, and another reason why you should not compare yourself to others. Brushes also make a huge difference. I find that with large, fluffier brushes, it takes a lot longer to see pan because you're swirling or swiping your brush along a larger portion of the pan. So let's look at this Mario palette, for example. If I was taking one of these matte shades to put in my crease, I'm swirling around a larger, fluffier brush and I'm hitting more of the pan, as opposed to something like a pencil brush, which you can concentrate on one spot. And the same, every time you go to pick up that shadow with the pencil brush, you can put it in the same spot in your palette, in your shadow, and you will see that dip in no time because you are concentrating your brush in the same spot. And I don't think that's cheating either. I've heard a few people say that focusing a brush in one area is cheating, and you're using the same amount of product. It just means that if one person is focusing their brush in one spot and one person is going over the whole pan, you know, person A is going to see pan faster. It's going to take longer for person B, but when person B finally hits pan, they're going to hit a lot of pan at once. I've seen that with some people. It almost looks like, you know, nothing, 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 and then all of a sudden massive pan because of the way they were using the product. And other people, it's like, oh, I was using the shadow for a week and I hit pan, a little tiny speck, and then they can grow and expand on the pan. And for some people, hitting pan faster, seeing that little sliver of silver is inspiring and helps them keep going, as opposed to like, it feels like the shadow is never ending. Another little tip for seeing pan faster, and in fact panning your shadows faster, is to foil them. Do not attempt that with matte shadows. It will not work, but like shimmers, metallics, glitters, use them wet. I tend to go in with Fix Plus, and I just really love that dripping metallic look. I just love the way my eyeshadows look when they're wet. I pretty much always do it now with my shimmery shades because I also get more control with it. So I hit pan faster, I love the finish and the way it looks better, and I get more control. So it's an all-over win for me, and I always throw that tip out in videos because it really does help me use up shades like that much, much faster. So I really hope that helped you guys somewhat. Let me know if you have any questions, like I said before, down below, and I will do my best to answer you as soon as I can. Just remember to be realistic with yourself, set reasonable goals, celebrate your victories, and have fun. You know, it's makeup. Don't take it too seriously. Don't get too competitive. Have fun with it. That really is the best advice I could possibly give. But if I can be of any more help to you during your panning journey, just let me know because I'd be more than happy to do so. So thank you so much for watching, for spending some time with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope I will talk to you soon. Bye for now.